What happens when Hollywood's most beloved action hero meets late-night television's most controversial host? You won't believe what unfolds when Harrison Ford sits down with Jimmy Kimmel for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview, only for it to turn into one of the most explosive confrontations in late-night TV history. The tension was obvious from the moment Ford walked onto the stage. What began as light banter quickly escalated into a full-scale verbal battle that left the audience stunned and ended with Ford storming off the set in visible anger. Before diving into this unbelievable story, make sure to hit the subscribe button and leave a comment below, because what happens when these two giants collide can only be described as television gold that went terribly wrong. The atmosphere in Studio 6A was electric as Harrison Ford entered the thunderous applause. The legendary actor, there to promote his latest film, appeared relaxed as he took his seat across from Jimmy Kimmel. What the audience didn't know was that tensions had been building behind the scenes for hours. Ford's publicist had reportedly raised concerns about Kimmel's recent habit of ambushing guests with uncomfortable questions, but the show's producers assured them the interview would be straightforward and promotional. Kimmel opened with his trademark grin, though experienced viewers could sense something different in his demeanor that night. Harrison Ford, everybody. Han Solo himself is here, Kimmel announced, gesturing dramatically toward his guest. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Ford's response was noticeably restrained, just a brief nod and a tight smile. Far from the warm reaction Kimmel seemed to expect. So, Harrison, you've been doing this for what, 45 years now? Kimmel began, his tone casual on the surface, but carrying an undertone that made Ford's eyes narrow slightly. That's a long time in Hollywood. You've seen a lot of changes, haven't you? Ford leaned back in his chair, his weathered hands clasped together. I've seen enough, he replied curtly, his voice carrying the familiar, gravelly tone that had made him famous. Something in his delivery suggested he wasn't just referring to the industry's evolution. The first warning sign appeared when Kimmel shifted in his chair, adopting what regular viewers recognized as his gotcha posture. You know, I've been reading some interesting things about your views on modern Hollywood, Kimmel said, his smile widening in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Particularly your comments about streaming services and the direction filmmaking is heading. Ford's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I think I've been pretty clear about my positions, he said, his tone cooling by the second. The audience, sensing the change in energy, quieted from their earlier excitement. Oh, you have been clear, Kimmel said, nodding as he theatrically picked up a stack of papers from his desk. Very clear about a lot of things lately. Your opinions on everything from CGI to method acting too well, let's just say you haven't held back. The camera caught Ford's expression shifting, his eyes hardening as he realized this was not the softball promotional interview he'd been promised. Jimmy, I'm here to talk about my new film, Ford said, his voice carrying a warning anyone who had worked with him over the years would immediately recognize. But Kimmel didn't retreat. If anything, he seemed energized by Ford's discomfort. Oh, we'll get to that, he said with a dismissive wave. But first, I think our audience would love to hear more about some of your more controversial takes on the industry that made you a star. The studio audience began to shift uneasily in their seats, fully aware of the growing tension between the two men. From the wings, Ford's publicist could be seen making urgent hand signals to the producers. Kimmel, however, appeared fully committed to his chosen direction. You see, Harrison, Kimmel continued, his voice taking on a condescending edge that would become the spark for everything that followed. I always find it interesting when actors who've made millions from this industry suddenly decide to bite the hand that feeds them. Ford's hands tightened around the arms of his chair, his knuckles whitening as the meaning of Kimmel's words sank in. The legendary actor's famously stoic face began to crack with real anger. Whatever Kimmel believed he was doing, he'd clearly misjudged. Kiss guest tolerance for public humiliation. The next few seconds would mark the point of no return. As Ford's legendary temporarily seen in decades of professional casing interviews finally surfaced. "Let me stop you right there, Jimmy." Ford's voice cut through the studio like a blade, his trademark composure finally breaking. The audience fell completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. "I didn't come here to be lectured by someone who's made a career out of cheap shots and manufactured controversy." Kimmel's eyes lit up with what could only be described as predatory excitement. This was exactly the reaction he had been fishing for, okay? And now he had Hollywood royalty on the hook. "Oh, come on, Harrison," he laughed, though there was no humor in it. "You can dish it out in interviews, but you can't take a little pushback. That's not the Han Solo I remember." The mention of his most iconic character struck a nerve deeper than anyone expected. Ford leaned forward in his chair, his voice dropping to the menacing whisper that had intimidated directors and co-stars for decades. "Don't you dare use my work to justify your pathetic attempt at gotcha journalism. You want to talk about biting hands? Let's talk about how you've built your entire career on humiliating people who come here in good faith." The camera operators were having a field day, cutting between close-ups of Ford's increasingly agitated expression and Kimmel's smug satisfaction. The live audience sat in stunned silence, many pulling out their phones to capture what was clearly becoming television history. "Good faith," Kimmel scoffed, shuffling through his papers with exaggerated dramatic flair. "Is that what you call it when you trash the very franchises that made you rich and famous? When you publicly criticize the studios that turned you from a carpenter into a global icon?" Ford's face flushed with anger, years of pent-up frustration with the media finally finding an outlet. "You don't know what you're talking about, Jimmy. You sit behind this desk making jokes about people's life's work, their passion projects, their art. You've never created anything meaningful in your entire career except controversy." The insult landed. Kimmel's carefully constructed persona began to slip, revealing something darker underneath. "Meaningful," he shot back, his voice rising. "You want to talk about meaningful? You've spent the last 5 years complaining about Star Wars, Indiana Jones, everything that made you relevant. Without those franchises, you'd still be hammering nails in Hollywood." That was the final straw. Ford stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward with such force it nearly toppled over. The sudden movement sent a shockwave through the studio, security guards instinctively stepping forward from the wings. "You arrogant little man," Ford growled, towering over Kimmel, who remained seated, though his cocky demeanor was beginning to waver. "You think because you have a microphone and an audience, it gives you the right to diminish other people's work, to question their integrity." Realizing he might have pushed too far, but unable to back down, Kimmel doubled down. "I'm just asking the questions everyone else is thinking. Harrison, why is it that every actor who reaches a certain age suddenly becomes an expert critic of the industry that made them?" "Because we've earned the right," Ford exploded, his voice echoing through the stunned studio. "We've put in the work. We've taken the risks. We've created the characters people love. What have you done except tear down better people than yourself?" The confrontation had escalated far beyond anything anyone anticipated. Kimmel's producers were frantically signaling from the control room, but their host seemed determined to carry it through to its bitter end. The tension in the studio was suffocating, crew members frozen in place, unsure whether to intervene or let the drama play out. "You know what your problem is, Harrison," Kimmel said, finally standing to face his guest eye to eye, though Ford still had several inches on him. "You can't handle the fact that your time is over. The industry has moved on, and you're just a bitter old man clinging to past glory." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Ford's eyes narrowed to slits, his entire body tensing as if preparing for a physical confrontation. For a terrifying moment, it seemed the 80-year-old action star might actually lunge across the desk at his tormentor. Instead, Ford's response was even more devastating than violence could have been. You want to know what bitter looks like, Jimmy? Ford's voice dropped to a deadly calm, somehow more frightening than his earlier outburst. The studio fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the low hum of cameras still rolling. Bitter is a man so insecure about his own mediocrity that he has to tear down legends just to feel relevant. Kimmel's face went pale, but he was in too deep to retreat. Oh, please, spare me the lecture from someone who I'm not finished. Ford cut him off with such authority that Kimmel actually stepped back. You want to talk about my career being over? Let me tell you something about careers, son. I've been in this business since before you were born. I've worked with Ridley Scott, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas. I've created characters that will outlive both of us. What's your legacy going to be? Making celebrities uncomfortable for cheap laughs. The audience was completely transfixed, witnessing a masterclass in controlled fury. Ford's decades of experience dealing with difficult directors and hostile press conferences were converging in this moment of reckoning. You sit there every night, Ford continued, his voice building like a freight train, hiding behind your writer's jokes and your producer's safety net, taking shots at people who actually put themselves on the line. Do you know what courage is, Jimmy? It's not ambushing guests who come here to promote their work. It's standing in front of a camera for 40 years and bearing your soul to the world. Kimmel tried to interrupt, but Ford was relentless now, years of media frustration pouring out as if a dam had burst. You want to question my integrity, my commitment to my craft? I have broken bones for my roles. I've worked 80-hour days well into my 70s. I've given everything I had to characters that mean something to people. And you? You've given the world what, exactly? The host's usual quick wit seemed to have vanished. For the first time in his career, Jimmy Kimmel was being outmatched on his own show. And everyone in the studio could feel the power dynamic shifting in real time. You know what the real tragedy is here? Ford pressed on, now pacing behind his chair like a caged predator. You had a chance to have a real conversation with someone who's lived through 5 decades of Hollywood history. You could have asked about working with the greatest directors of all time, about the evolution of filmmaking, about what it really takes to create something lasting. Instead, you chose to play gotcha games like some TMZ wannabe. Kimmel finally found his voice, but it came out as a weak stammer. I was just the audience expects entertainment, not character assassination. Ford shot back. There's a difference between entertaining people and humiliating them. But clearly, that's a distinction you've never learned. The tension in the room reached a breaking point. Crew members glanced at one another nervously, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let this unprecedented moment continue. Ford's publicist had stopped signaling from the wings and was now frantically texting, likely reaching out to crisis management teams. You want to know what's really pathetic, Jimmy? Ford said, his voice carrying devastating finality. You've had every advantage in this business. A primetime slot, unlimited resources, access to the biggest stars in the world. And what have you done with it? You've turned it into a platform for your own insecurities and petty resentments. Kimmel's face flushed with anger and embarrassment as the cameras captured every micro-expression while he struggled to regain control of his own show. Look, Harrison, maybe we should learn the difference between journalism and bullying. Ford interrupted, his words landing like hammer blows. Maybe you should understand that the people who come on this show are human beings with dignity, not punching bags for your neuroses. The audience was utterly silent now, many visibly uncomfortable as they watched their host being systematically dismantled by one of Hollywood's most respected figures. Social media was already erupting with real-time reactions from viewers at home, aware they were witnessing television history. I've worked with real professionals, Jimmy, Ford continued. People who understand that entertainment doesn't have to come at the expense of basic human decency. Directors who know how to challenge actors without degrading them. Hosts who can be funny without being cruel. Ford paused. letting the words settle before delivering what would become the most quoted line of the confrontation. But you wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Because you've never actually created anything worth defending. The silence that followed was deafening. Kimmel stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, as if searching for words that simply weren't there. The career talk show host, famous for his quick comebacks and sharp wit, had been completely neutralized by Hollywood royalty. But Ford wasn't done yet. The legendary actor was building toward something that would make everything that came before seem like mere preparation. You know what the saddest part of all this is, Jimmy? Ford's voice carried a weight that pressed down on everyone in the studio. I actually used to respect what late-night television could be. Carson, Letterman, even Conan. They understood their job was to make their guests shine, not tear them down for ratings. Kimmel tried once more to regain control, his voice shaky and desperate. Harrison, I think we're getting a little off track here. Maybe we should. Ford's laugh was cold and humorless. No, Jimmy, I think we're finally on the right track. For the first time tonight, we're having an honest conversation. The question is whether you can handle honesty. The studio audience was captivated by this raw display of authentic emotion. Many instinctively recorded on their phones, knowing they were witnessing a moment that would be replayed and analyzed for years. Let me tell you something about the people you mock and belittle on this show, Ford continued, his voice rising with renewed passion. They're artists, craftspeople, storytellers who've dedicated their lives to bringing joy to millions. They've sacrificed privacy, personal relationships, sometimes their health, all in service of their art, and you treat them like court jesters for your amusement. Ford turned to address the audience directly, his commanding presence filling the studio. You folks deserve better than this. You deserve hosts who celebrate talent instead of exploiting it. You deserve entertainment that lifts people up instead of tearing them down. The audience began murmuring, some nodding in agreement. The shift in the room was palpable. Kimmel's ambush had completely backfired, with the audience's sympathy now fully behind Ford. I've been in this business for almost 50 years, Ford said, turning back to Kimmel, who looked increasingly small behind his desk. I've seen the best and worst of Hollywood. I've worked with genuine professionals who understood that with great platform comes great responsibility. And then there are people like you who mistake cynicism for sophistication and cruelty for comedy. Kimmel's producers frantically gestured from the control room, but their hosts seemed paralyzed, unable to find a way out of the hole he'd dug. The confident, quick-witted performer who had controlled this stage for years was nowhere to be found. You asked me about my legacy earlier, Ford said, his voice final. My legacy is characters that have inspired generations. Stories that have brought families together. Movies people watch when they need hope, adventure, or just a good laugh. What's your legacy going to be, Jimmy? What will people remember about you in 20 years? The question hung like a death sentence. Kimmel opened his mouth, but no words came out. For perhaps the first time in his career, he was completely speechless on his own show. Ford picked up his jacket from the back of his chair with deliberate slowness, every movement calculated for maximum impact. I came here tonight to talk about my new film, share stories that might entertain your audience, to be a good guest on your show. Instead, you turned it into an opportunity to feed your own ego at my expense. The actor began walking toward the edge of the stage, but stopped and turned back one final time. You know the difference between a true professional and a hack, Jimmy. A professional knows when to stop. A hack keeps pushing until they destroy everything around them. Ford's final words were delivered with the quiet intensity that had made him one of cinema's most compelling actors. I've spent my career working with people who understand that respect is earned through talent, hard work, and treating others with dignity. You might want to think about what you're earning with performances like tonight's. The studio was completely silent as Ford made his way to the exit. Not a single person moved or spoke as Hollywood royalty walked out with his dignity intact, leaving behind a host whose credibility lay in ruins. As the heavy studio door closed behind Ford with a resounding thud, Kimmel was left standing alone at his desk, facing an audience looking at him with a mixture of disappointment and disgust. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every second of his public humiliation. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Social media exploded with clips of Ford's devastating takedown, with hashtags supporting the actor trending worldwide within hours. Critics praised Ford's eloquent defense of professional dignity while condemning Kimmel's ambush tactics. The incident sparked widespread discussion about the ethics of late-night television and the responsibility of hosts to their guests. Ratings for Kimmel's show plummeted in the following weeks as viewers abandoned a host they now saw as a bully rather than an entertainer. The confrontation had revealed something ugly beneath the carefully crafted persona, and audiences weren't interested in supporting it anymore. Harrison Ford had walked into the studio as a guest promoting his latest project. He walked out as the man who had exposed the worst impulses of modern television and emerged victorious in one of the most lopsided confrontations in late-night history. It was a masterclass in dignity, professionalism, and the power of standing up to bullies, even when the cameras are rolling.